Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Caitlin from Florals.com and today I'm showing you how to make these two Thanksgiving Day cards using some stenciling techniques. I'll be using a ton of distress inks and stamps from my stash, as well as some die cut leaves and a stencil. So to get started, I have two A2 size pieces of paper, which are actually Nina White Solar cardstock, and those are cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Now, since I am doing stenciling today, I'm using this stencil from Magenta, which I'll try to find online and link down below, but I actually bought it at a local scrapbook store, so it might not be available online, but I'll try to find it if I can. I really like this stencil because it reminded me of fall leaves falling from the trees, and I just really liked the organic pattern of it. So I have a couple tips and tricks to share with you for stenciling techniques. One is to make sure that you either use a paper that's larger than your stencil or use a stencil that's larger than your paper. Don't do the same exact size. Here you can see in a little bit I mess up a little bit when I tape down my stencil so that my stencil and paper aren't adhered well to my work surface, and then I end up having to restart. So I highly recommend using a lot of tape. Even though you don't think it's necessary, it probably is worth it, especially with the cheaper tapes. If you're using more expensive tape, I understand that you might not want to use up that sort of stuff, but just make sure you have the main points down so nothing happens while you're stenciling. I'm starting off with Fossilized Amber Distress ink, which is one of my favorite gold and yellow distress inks. It's definitely a perfect fall color, and I'm going to just kind of blend that in, and this is the technique that I'll use for the other card as well once I do finally get started on this card. But you can see that my paper just moved and everything's ruined. So I slipped that paper out, and don't worry, I use the back side of it later on. But for now I'm going to slip in another piece of A2 sized cardstock and add a ton of extra tape. So the main problem is my paper's too small to reach outside the stencil. So what I end up having to do for my final card is cut down this panel, but all is well, it works out in the end. So no need to fret over that. So I would recommend using either a larger stencil or a larger paper when you're stenciling onto, just to save you a headache later like I had here. So back to the Fossilized Amber, I'm going to put it in the same spot that I had it before, and sorry for a little bit of the wiggling of my table. I know it's probably a little bit annoying, but nothing fancy with the blending, just kind of using my blender tool. I'm putting a lot of ink down because I want vibrant colors, but of course you can get a lighter look. And I blend that out a little bit because I do want this to blend with the associated colors. Next up, I am using the Carved Pumpkin or Spiced Marmalade. I never remember which one I grab. This is Carved Pumpkin, I think. And I'm blending that next to the yellow, putting a little bit here and there, just to see what it looks like. I definitely didn't have a plan for what I wanted each of the colors to be or to blend into, which you might want to have some sort of plan like that, because I do use some colors that sometimes don't mix well together. When I bring in the green, you'll see what happens. But so far, yellow and orange work really well. And I'm actually not blending out very well. I didn't really think it needed to be with the stencil, but next I'm using the Candied Apple, which is a very vibrant red. And again, I want those vibrant tones, but you can get lighter tones with distress inks. You just need to use a lighter hand and less ink. So once I get that blended, I realize that somehow I need to fit the green on this sheet. So in order to do that, I actually will revisit a color, because I know red and green don't mix very well together. It'll create a brown color, which is fine if that's what you want. That's definitely an autumnal color, definitely could work. It's just not what I wanted. So I go back to Fossilized Amber and blend out these two sections, the one with the orange on the bottom and the one with the red on the top, so that yellow and green can blend together instead. But I don't use a lot of green because I end up messing my stencil up anyway. Surprise, surprise. Definitely use a bigger sheet of paper than your stencil, or a stencil bigger than your sheet of paper, but I'm coming in with Mowed Lawn and just rubbing a little bit of that in. So you can see that my stencil got moved, which is okay. I think it's fine. The stencil is definitely legible, but you can see my edges definitely need to be trimmed later on. So for my second card back technique, what I'm going to do is take the washi tape off my stencil, and then I'm going to bring over the secondary piece of cardstock, and I also will need a water spritzer. So set that original cardstock aside to dry. Wipe off your workstation. I just use baby wipes because I find it gets the ink up pretty well. You'll also see that my fingers are quite stained with distress ink. That's something that comes along with the game. So if you have somewhere to go after you're making cards, I might recommend gloves. So I just spritzed my stencil with water. So this is the side of the stencil that my ink was going through. So there's a ton of ink on top of it. So I spritzed it with water, and distress inks work really well with water, which is nice. So what essentially is I'm going to get a nice light pattern of this negative side of the stencil to use on my cards. So I let both of those dry. You could definitely use a heat gun if you'd like, but I really like the soft look and then the harsh look on the other side. Now that our backgrounds are done, we can start assembling our cards. I pulled out 2 A2 sized card bases made out of 110-pound craft cardstock. And if you guys didn't know, an A2 sized card is 5.5 by 8.5 scored at 4 1/4, and then you'll have an A2 sized card, which is 4 1/4 by 5.5 when folded. So you'll see that I have these 2 leaves here, just die cuts that were given to me by a swap friend, and then I also have my card base. So what I'm going to do is take my card front that I created and trim that down, because there are sections of it that are not colored. So I end up trimming it down to is 5 1/4 by 4, which makes a perfect matte edge around the card front. So you'll see that I'll have a little bit of a border once I adhere this to my card. And again, this isn't a super detailed stencil work design. It's just more of a free-form organic design. There's a little bit of extra color at the bottom, so I decided to put that at the bottom so that the weight's down there and not up top. And then I need to decide what I want to do on the front of this card. So I have my leaves, but I also want to add a little bit of extra dimension by inking up the edges. So I go back with fossilized amber because it's the lightest color I have, but of course you could use any color. And I'm going to ink up the edges just to give it a little bit more definition. Even though the white on craft cardstock is a good contrast, I think this just pulls together the colors more. And you could definitely use any other colors like I mentioned, but I would highly recommend using one of the lighter ones unless you're going for a really bold statement. Then you could definitely use the red. Now that the edges are inked up, I can start thinking about a sentiment I might put on this card, or what I want to do with this leaf on this card. So since the leaf is a white piece of cardstock with gold foil, it does blend into the background a bit. So what I'll decide to do is actually use some foam dots under that, which you'll see a little bit later. But for now, I think I want a sentiment on the outside of the card. But I don't want anything too bold. I want it to keep pretty light as well as like the background so they match. It's a little more cohesive. So I pull out this W+9 stamp set, and there's one on here that says "Let us give thanks." And I'm actually going to stamp that using my stamping tool and put that right in the bottom front of the card, nice and centered. So pulling out my stamping tool here and putting my magnets down. And again, like I said, it just says "Let us give thanks," which I think is a beautiful sentiment. And if any of these products that I use are still available, I'll have them linked down below in case you want to purchase them or learn more about them. So I'm going to center that down here, and instead of using a traditional like black or any sort of neutral color for the sentiment, I actually go for one of the colors I originally wanted to use in my background, and that's actually the Fired Brick color, which I've never used for distress inks before, so I'm glad I got to use it. So I'm just going to ink that up and stamp it down. And I actually do it twice because Tim Holtz distress inks tend to have a little bit of a spotty appearance. So here are my 2 final cards. This is the one I made off camera. I used that beautiful bold background, and I just simply used another leaf on foam dots and then a lawn fawn sentiment. And next up I have the card I just showed you I made, and each of these actually has a sentiment on the inside as well, which is that W+9 longer one that says, "May your blessings be plenty, your friends be many, and the spirit of the season fill your heart and home," which is a really sweet sentiment for this time of year. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know which card you liked best. I would have filmed both, but I did run out of time on my battery. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!